so much for joining me. I started a project called A Year in Conversation with Augusta a couple of months ago, where I started it with Steve. And the main purpose of the project is hoping to inspire others and initiate a conversation around equality, equity, inclusivity with high-profile leaders like yourself from across the UK. So yeah, I'm very pleased to be speaking to you today. I have a couple of questions for you, and yeah, just let me know what you can answer. But it's Marvin, so I'm sure Marvin.
You can ask anything. You can ask anything. It's not a problem.
So my first question for you, I know you were elected back in 2016, and interestingly, I was just right outside the building when the results were announced. So I saw you from a far distance. So my first question, outside being a mayor, as a lot of people know you, who are you in your private space?
Yeah, well, just still me. I grew up here. I've got 7 brothers and sisters. Most of my family are in Bristol, other families in the United States, America, Jamaica, and then my sister lives in Zurich now. I'm interested in trying to get my boys to take up boxing like I did. They don't seem as keen as I was. They started wrestling, the Olympic wrestling, which is great.
Professional boxing?
No, just amateur. Okay. And then, played a bit of rugby at university. Ride a bike, like my mountain bike. I've just bought a new mountain bike for me and the boys. So we're kind of trying to get ourselves out. Unfortunately, COVID's hit us, but getting back into some hills and aiming to get up to Wales and Forest of Dean, do some trail riding. Nice. Yeah, lots of different things. Yeah, married. Mum still lives in the same house I moved to in 1978. All that. Before it was posh to live in Easton, that was. Wow. Easton's very different to the way it was when I was a kid.
I was watching a video called The Mayor's Race, and snippets of Easton they show does not look like the Easton that we see today.
No, it's gentrifying as a rate of knots. Yeah. I mean, stuff needs to change. But everyone's feeling the pressure of house prices and rent increases, and we recognise that the way it destabilises communities. Which is why we need to build homes. We need to build different tenures of homes. And we need the investment, public and private, to do it. If I get very basic about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you always wanted to become the mayor of Bristol? Like, what was your motivation? How did you find yourself in the current position that you currently are in?
No. Well, first off, there's a practical reality to that. That the mayoral position only came into existence in 2012 after a referendum. But I'd always been interested in politics because growing up, mixed race kids, experiencing white experience, being chased down the street on some occasions, and Bristol was a hostile city in many ways on race lines. It was very fractious. Riots in the 80s as well, rebellions. I lived with all that, and my mum, essentially we grew up poor, we were on benefits, and I saw my mum mistreated, and I didn't want people to have to grow up like that. I didn't, and I wanted to do something about it. So I guess there was always an interest in politics as a possible way to do something about it, but I didn't know what that was. I mean, I met an MP when I remember an MP coming to school when I was about 16. I didn't have a clue what that was all about. So I had this idea to do something, and I guess I had a sense that I could do something in some form. My plan was to join the Royal Marines, be an officer, leave after 8 years, because then I first came across Paddy Ashdown. You see, he was a former Special Forces leader, Lib Dem. So my plan was, okay, I'll do what he did: join Marines, do 8 years, leave, and then become an MP. Try and become an MP. But anyway, my eyesight wasn't up to it, so I ended up going to university, fortunately, and then I joined campaign organisations, Tier Fund. I went to Washington, worked with Sojourners. Interestingly, I shared an office with Reverend Emery Searcy, who was a friend of the King family, Black Baptist minister from Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so just get first-hand accounts of what the Kings were like. And I travelled around. I joined the BBC. I
Okay.
thought, right, let me be a journalist. That would be a way to change the world. But BBC was a hostile environment for me. It didn't work. I was there for 5 years, and in 5 years got about a £3,000, £4,000 pay increase, and didn't get one promotion in 4.5 years. So I find, yeah, BBC is a problematic employer for me. But then, yeah, stumbled across the mayoral role. It came up, I put my name forward, and I got selected. And next thing you know, I'm running, I'm losing, and then I ran again in 16 and won.
That is brave. That is brave. And you're running again.
Yeah, I'll go for re-election, but then that would be it, really. I think 8 years. A good friend of mine, who ended up, he's presenting at the BBC. He's got a senior role in religion now. But he said to me, in any job, you spend about a year learning to do the job, a year kind of innovating, and then your third year, you probably become quite conservative, defending all the things you've done. You know, and that's how you become a problem. So I would just extend that timeline politically. It takes some time to begin to kind of get the city, you know, when we come in to take over a city council, it was my predecessor's organization, it wasn't mine. You know, it takes time to build your team, to set your goals, to kind of get a sense of the city. That takes a couple of years. Then you spend time beginning to implement. So you really do need 2 terms. But I think beyond 2 terms, then I suspect I might become kind of defensive of what I've done. So I think everything needs to reinvent itself every now and again. And I think 2 terms is enough for any city. Then it'd be time for Bristol to reinvent itself with another leader around another culture, another way of doing things, seeing life in Bristol.
Yeah, I think that takes us right to our next question about, you know, being the first mayor of Bristol with a mixed heritage. And, you know, just thinking about, you know, from the point you got elected in 2016 up until now, what are some of the challenges that you faced upon, you know, becoming the mayor and since you've been in the role?
So I am the first, but I'm only the second mayor as well. And bearing in mind, actually, which is a quite interesting fact, that I'm the first directly elected mayor of African heritage of any major European city. So there was an occasion I shared when I went to a Eurocities gathering a couple of years ago, which is the leaders of cities right across Europe. And as I do, I looked around the hall to see if anyone looked like me. It's just, you know, just what you do, right? You do it without a second thought. And there wasn't. And I, first of all, I was taken aback. I thought, gosh, I'm the only person in this room. I'm the only black person in the room. And I thought, well, of course I am.
There. Yeah,
Of course I am. It's just me and Sadiq, right? Sadiq was the first Muslim mayor, and he was elected mayor of London. So
yeah.
So the challenges are general and specific. First off, there are challenges to being a mayor. And those are really, really interesting. I mean, it's just the complexities of a city, the interdependence. No issue is a single issue. Campaigns run on single issues, but issues are interdependent. So I'll give you an example on that. So you've got a big campaign on car charging, right? Yeah. But Bristol Live, as is their once the row, published, actually prematurely published, because I haven't actually said this, that we're going to introduce charging for a clean air zone. Where there's now 150 odd comments by people saying, well, we don't want charging for cars in the city. But remember all the campaigns, people saying, you're not doing enough on air quality to stop private cars. So you've got these 2 views in the city, both of which have valid points, but never actually talk to each other, but just shout at the politician in the middle, right? So that's one of the challenges of being, everyone people fight their battles on your back, but don't actually engage in a conversation. This is happening in Easton right now about, if I can say, about St. Mark's Road. There are people who want it pedestrianised. There are people who absolutely oppose it. They're not talking to each other, they're talking to me. They're saying, and I'm saying, actually, hold on, let's practice being in a community here in which people want different things. Why don't we talk to each other? And actually, one of the outcomes of this is not just who gets what they want, but actually we come out of it having strengthened our relationships, and got an outcome that we live with, that we practice what it means to live in a world in which not everyone gets everything they want every time, but we have conversations about it. So even if you don't get what you want, or you actually get what you didn't want, you've been respected and you've built relationships. So that's one of the challenges of being mayor, and the immediacy of outcomes as well. So as I said, it takes time to make things happen. So on house building, it takes time to start to change an organization to be able to deliver homes. But people want homes yesterday. Cost and statutes are classic, right? So, and this feeds over into a particular challenge for me. I get elected, and then suddenly people are saying, well, why is there still racism in Bristol? You know, I'm saying, hold on, first off, or why isn't cost and statute get taken down? Hold on. So now cost and statute is my fault, right? And then I've got some kind of the radical kind of political groups in the city then starting to blame me and Asha for the much adventurers as well. That's been quite interesting. I think two black women are suddenly a black man and a black woman are suddenly now responsible to a kind of, dare I say, quite a white kind of radical kind of, you know, activist group suddenly start saying, Marvin and Asha, what about these secret meetings you're having with the venturers? I say, hold on, the overtones of what you're saying here is we're responsible for the racist legacy. So that's interesting, that disproportionate level of expectation on us to solve racism in an instant is there as well. So yeah, those are real challenges. Yeah, and there's a very, very deep challenge for me that touches on issues of race and class, actually. In that, bearing in mind what I shared with you about my experience in journalism. And journalism is, you know, Barney Chowdhury was a BBC correspondent and wrote a paper about the hemorrhaging of Black and Asian staff at the BBC. And when I was there, I could see, you know, we know it's dominated by, you know, the middle class and so forth. And that's, you know, let's just be honest about that. But when I, as a Black mayor who grew up on benefits with a single mum in poverty, you know, on the wrong end of society, that was not given genuine opportunity in journalism, is suddenly got kind of quite posh Oxbridge, you know, Russell Group, you know, journalists coming and holding me accountable for the world order and its injustices. There's a dynamic in that. They they just want to talk to me like I'm just a politician. I'm saying, hold on, we don't abstract ourselves from the wider world. And I find that personally very challenging. And because I am the politician, in that sense, I have to, when I did speak up on it, I ended up getting attacked by journalists from right across the country, including one called Rupert, by the way, which is, I find, the poshest name alongside Piers in the world. You know, how dare you, you know, you're oppressing journalists. I'm saying, hold on, you're in the upper echelons of this society, not me. You know, and I find that a really challenging dynamic, one that I'm looking forward to exploring more when I'm no longer in office.
Yeah. When that happens, when you're being, but I'll just use the word attacked by journalists, do you openly call them out and exactly say what things are, or do you remain silent? Because it must be challenging for you to be, you know, at the two ends of the stream where there's what you can say.
You can't, because they got the pen. In that sense, they got the power. So I think it's part of a distorted conversation around power, whereby people talk about power as though it solely sits in the hands of politicians. When actually, if you watch the BBC documentary on Murdoch, I mean, Murdoch's the kingmaker, right? And the journalists in that sense were the kingmakers of Tony Blair back in the day. They backed it. Yeah? It's us that won it. And everyone at the moment, it seems like this desperate rush to portray, people are in this desperate rush to portray themselves as living on the margins of power and society, and too often co-opting the story of genuinely marginalized and powerless people to take it in a way that, to put pretty frank, is an insult to many. And that includes people in media too. Everyone, you know, if politicians do it. How many politicians didn't grow up on a council estate? It's like all of them did today. You know, everyone claims to have grown up on the margins, and it's getting a bit much. But I guess the real power is I haven't got time to engage in that, and it's dangerous for me to share it with you because someone clips it and writes it and says, "Oh, mayor complains he's being attacked by journalists." It's not, you know, it's never that simple, right? And that's one of my frustration. You know, a really simplistic world, a really simplistic framework applied to a very complicated world. It undermines the quality of our public narrative, and it undermines the quality of our public discourse. In fact, I'd say that simplistic framework applied to a complicated world resulted in Trump and Brexit. And that's the thing that really frustrates me. It's a 15-second world, isn't it? That's built around how many clicks can I generate, and clicks are generated by simplicity you know, and sound bites and conflict. And
Yeah.
these are all things that undermine the quality of our, you know, of our public discourse and ultimately our democracy.
Absolutely. And
So that's but yeah, you know, you know, I came in thinking, yeah, I want to do all this, but I'm having to take a deep breath and realize that some of the reasons that I went into journalism in the first instance, or attempted to get into journalism, to do good journalism, to tell the stories of the voiceless, to bring nuance to what we do, are not goals I have the liberty to pursue in elected office. And if you do, you end up, you know, it's not a gift. So it's you just have to suck it up. And when you're thinking, I wish things were more nuanced. I wish, you know, in fact, I did get a chance to do it when I was interviewed by Channel 4 when when Costa statue was first pulled down. And he was trying to say, well, it's this or it's that. And I was saying, well, actually, it's not this or that. It's mixed, it's complicated. And sometimes
I think he had a direct, you know, aim as to what he wanted you to say in that conversation, in that interview. Yeah.
You wanted to get me, and again, gotcha journalism. You know, it's okay, but Barack Obama talks about this a lot. What we need is a pursuit of truth, no matter how complicated that truth is, not the pursuit of a headline or a click.
Absolutely. And you managed that conversation perfectly. Do you think there is a certain level of pressure on you as, you know, the first mayor of mixed heritage, you know, to resolve racial inequalities? I know this is a conversation that we have to continue beyond you being in office, but do you think there's a certain level of pressure?
Oh, undoubtedly, yeah. I said around you know, that and it comes from many points. So there can be a pressure on Black people as a whole as soon as they're invited into a room to have the solution on racism. And I've always been quite forceful on that, outside of politics, you know. So someone comes and said, look, I want to tackle racism in my organization. What should we do? Right. And the pressure then becomes, well, if I haven't got the answer to this, they're just going to go back and say, well, I was the Black person. They didn't know what to do. So how do we know? How are we supposed to know what to do? Now, you don't absolve yourself as responsibility. You need to have some solutions. I'm not into an activism that defines a problem but does not suggest any solutions, because anyone can define problems. Right? But what you don't want to do is you don't want to carry on lifting up the burden of coming up with everyone else's solutions, right? When they're absolving themselves of responsibility. So that's a general challenge. Certainly, you know, there has been this, well, you've been in 2 years now. Why is there still racism in the city? And I am not likening myself to Barack Obama. In fact, in 2012, I'd say there was some racial troping by some of the activists. I know he thinks he's Barack Obama. You know what that's about? It's just because I'm mixed race with short hair. That's but I am not saying I'm like, but what I am saying is that I saw the same thing happen around Obama. Interesting, myself and Edson Burton, who's a Bristol historian, both were interviewed when he was elected. And our point was, don't expect too much. You know, he, in many ways, he is not going to be able to change the world on a moment. And one of the ironies for being Black and in politics is that more is expected of you on race, and yes, you have less latitude to do anything on race. Because the moment you do anything on race, people say, "Oh, you're just about race. That's all you do." So I turned down an interview on Sunday in response to Robert Jenrick's article in the Telegraph, talking about the hauling down of the Colston statue. Well, then obviously I get phone calls asking me to respond to him, and we turn those down because all what's happening is you're just seeing me as the go-to guy on race and statues. And that's not just what I am. We are the people on digital inclusion, on house building, on transport, on climate, inclusive economic development, on domestic violence, period poverty, education outcomes, school exclusions, we're on jobs, working standards. That's what I'm the mayor of, not just statues and race. So we turn that interview down. So you get pigeonholed very quickly, pay a high price. At the same time, the community expect you to talk about race all the time. So you're like, hold on, you know, we got to pace ourselves here, you know, otherwise we burn ourselves out.
Because I believe after what happened last year, Bristol, the name of Bristol went worldwide, even though obviously a lot of people know about Bristol, but that happened. And I know that post that occurrence, you must have had a lot of questions around, oh, so what are you going to do now? What are your next steps? What are you going to put on the pit of where coasting was pulled down? Have you had a lot of that?
Yeah, I do. But again, this is where I try to put the statue into context. The statue is significant, right? They're really significant because they elevate, they celebrate, and they're indicative of what we choose to remember or what we choose to forget, or what we're allowed to remember or allowed to forget when we think about, you know, our stories. And then they're not a tool to telling history. They are a tool of celebration, right? Statues. So taking it down is of great significance. But at the same time, as I said, I didn't get a memo saying we've just seen a radical change in the experiences of Black people in Bristol since yesterday. School exclusions have gone down. People being going into mental health institutions have gone down. Mental health and well-being's improved. None of that happened. And one of my warnings in those interviews was symbolic acts can be important, but careful, symbolic acts are not policy, right? And actually what's historically has happened to undermine the effectiveness of social movements is that mischievous people have substituted policy for substantive change, right? They call it tokenism. Right. So actually, funny enough, King, if you read King, quite the King I think we should remember, which is a lot more radical than the teddy bear we're allowed to remember. The King shared, that integration wasn't the aim of the civil rights movement. Equality was the aim. And in some senses, integration in of itself can become tokenism, even though that can be the result of substantial policy. And King at one point said, I'm coming to basically experiment with the idea that actually maybe we need segregation for a while, because it was in segregation that we could equip ourselves, build up our economic base, so that when we integrate into equality, rather than what tended to happen was integration into inequality, right? So which is challenging for some, and I'm the physical embodiment of integration, so I'm not pro-segregation. But what we got to remember is that integration into inequality was not what it was about. So we have to be really careful about symbolic acts, taking up the bandwidth and pushing out the place for meaningful substantive change. So where I'm at is simply saying, well, yeah, the statue's been pulled down, and that's a massive moment for Bristol. I can't agree with the way it happened. It was a criminal act, but it's a massive moment for Bristol, and I recognise that. But we'll continue doing what we were doing anyway, building affordable homes, trying to improve mental health, running the Stepping Up programme, recruiting people from a wider range of backgrounds to the magistracy to transform the criminal justice system. We were doing the stuff on race equality anyway.
Outside the coasting, yeah. Okay. That actually moves us swiftly to the next question, because I did have it written down to ask for you, beyond what has happened throughout 2020, what is your priority? And you have already answered that. So my next question:
building affordable homes. I think it's the single most significant policy tool we have. Both for social justice in the moment right here, but also our wider planetary responsibility. Because the kind of homes we build and where we build them will be one of the biggest determinants of the requirements we make of the Earth's resources, carbon and biodiversity and all the rest of it. For students or people in general who would be accessing this video on our Students' Union YouTube channel, who may or may not be interested in politics, what would be your advice to them whilst they're still in a space where they're still trying to decide if it's something that they want to do long term? So I wouldn't tell anyone to do anything, but I would say I went for breakfast once. I'm not name dropping, but it was with Stanley McChrystal, who's a general in the US.
Okay.
When I was over there, and he said that one of his big fears about public life now is that the price for getting involved in public life is now so high that good people won't do it. And the only people that will end up doing it are people who either have no ability to hear criticism or they're willing to pay any price to get power. And actually, you've seen that in the United States, writ large, right? And it's because of the way we treat people in public life. But I would say, if we don't get involved in public life, then we do. Then if we retreat from it, we leave it up to those kinds of people. Right? And as friends of mine, you know, I've said about getting elected, and they say, "Well, it's not for me, Marv." And I say, "Well, maybe it's not about you. Maybe you have a set of skills, right, that you have a responsibility to put at the public's disposal for a period of time. You don't have to do it for life. If you get elected, you don't have to spend the next 50 years of your life there. You just do it for 4 years or 8 years and move on and do something else. But if you've got some ability, I think there's an element of public responsibility to, and you've got good intentions to put that into to public service in electoral politics. So that's my thing. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be the best. But like they say, the world is run by people who turn up. And sometimes it's just a case of turning up. I'm a fallen human being just like everyone else, with my hypocrisies and contradictions and failures and weaknesses and my insecurities, but I get up every day and I just turn up and try and do stuff and try and have good people around me.
That's amazing. If you could change something, anything at all, which obviously you're happy to disclose, what would it be? Either personal or, in your role as mayor?
Oh, wow, that's a very broad. Would I make myself a supreme genius with the answers to all the world's ills? That would probably be helpful. What would I change?
Anything at all. Maybe.
I mean, it begins to sound a little bit kind of like I'm on a stage of a beauty pageant or something, so what I do. I mean, I think one of the biggest dangers we have is money being the measure of all things. And maybe if money wasn't the measure of all things, I mean, I could say we should just all genuinely love each other. That would be pretty good. We'd understand Ubuntu. We'd understand that we're interdependent. That would be. I suppose I could look at human motivation and what motivates us, or I could just pass a law, to say what would the change. I'd make sure that climate change would never go beyond certain planetary limits. Something I don't know. It's just difficult. But if I go for the motivational side rather than the law itself, I think it's maybe not having money is the measure of all things.
Thank you so much, Marvin. This has been fantastic. It has been an absolute pleasure, obviously, speaking to you one-on-one. Thank you for your time.
No problem.